Hey, welcome to my channel. I'm Char, and today I am starting a new series, and I'm calling it MishMash Creature Crash. So hopefully you enjoy this first installment. I had gotten the prompt of doing 3 different creatures, and I mashed them all together in my own way and then figured out what that would look like through this process. The creatures that I had gotten listed out to me were Tegu, which is a type of big monitor lizard, a Jaguar, which hopefully you know what that is. It's a pretty cool big cat, and also the last one was just owl. So I kind of just looked at a bunch of different species of owls, and I chose just a few different ones to work on the markings and stuff. So that is my prompt for this episode, and I will get into what the process is for working on that creature. So let's get into it. So to start, I went ahead and jumped on Pinterest and found a bunch of different kinds of reference for the Tegu here, and also the Jaguar, and eventually a few owl pictures as well. So once I got a board going and had all these different references, I could just quickly at a glance look at each one and figure out what kind of creature I wanted to design. So to start, I was working on this picture digitally, and I kind of like Clip Studio Paint to start sketches. I just find the sketching software in the pen and pencil tools in this app are just better than anything I've been able to get in Photoshop, and even a lot of different custom brushes. I just really like the brushes that I've gotten for Clip Studio and the way it works on the canvas. I started off with kind of a cat jaguar kind of form, and what I tend to do is, because it's digital and I don't have to worry about wasting paper or making a mess, I kind of just use layers like there's no tomorrow. So I'll start a sketch, and then when it may or may not be working for me, I'll just hide that layer and then start a new layer and kind of start from scratch at that point. If there's something I like, I may take that previous sketch and just turn down the opacity and then go ahead and sketch over top of it. I will be doing that later in this one, but for now I'm just kind of exploring shapes and ideas and the composition on the canvas and all that kind of stuff. So at this stage, I've moved on a little bit more on this creature. I like blending the anatomies in such a way where it's almost hard to figure out what the original base was. So it's not so much of a chimera creature where it just has the head of a goat and the body of a lion and the tail of a snake. I'd rather it look more seamless and more like a creature that could actually exist. So I'm playing around with the shapes here. I'm not crazy about the proportions. The neck's a little short. I was going for that big Tegu neck that they tend to have, but it kind of isn't really working for this creature. The pose of the creature looking away from the camera just wasn't really quite working for what I was looking for in this sketch, so goodbye. So the next thing I was thinking about doing was changing the orientation of the canvas. Sometimes you want to start off with something that's more of a portrait and switch it to a landscape, or vice versa. This time I am trying the portrait and seeing if that works better for the creature design that I'm interested in pursuing. I start off with generally the base head shape, usually a circle, and again I was trying to get that really big Tegu neck in there and trying to play around with the leg shape a little bit. I've been drawing cheetahs a lot lately, and I think you can tell from my initial pass here that that's kind of coming across in all the different creatures that I'm drawing. So eventually I kind of go ahead and skew the portrait, free transform it, make it a little bit squattier, and then change it so it's a little bit more Jaguar-esque in the proportions instead of so long and lanky, like more like a cheetah would be. So at this stage I kind of have the rough sketch more or less how I want. I changed the position of the creature from sitting to standing, and just to kind of give it more interest. And now I've gone ahead and created a new layer over top and changed the opacity down on the prior layer, if I could talk. And now I'm going ahead and figuring out the anatomy of this creature a little bit more in depth. Now that I have the base shape to work off of, I feel like it's easier to add in the details over top without having to worry about potentially messing up the base shape. I like going through and checking my references again, seeing kind of how an owl beak works, seeing how a Tegu mouth works, and how I can kind of incorporate that all into a muzzle that can kind of be a mishmash of all of them, including a little bit of Jaguar. So I've done my little layer trick again. I like keeping multiple layers below the layer I'm working on. It gives you that feeling of when you're inking over a sketch and you can kind of get the life and the feel of the sketch below by being able to still see it instead of just erasing it completely. So in order to kind of get that feeling, I just layer on top of layer of different sketches until I get to the design that I'm really looking for. I'm working on the details here, getting more specific, adding in those giant owl eyes. All of the creatures that I was working on all have circular pupils, so in a way it's kind of fun when you have creatures with elliptical pupils, or some geckos have really interestingly shaped pupils. I don't even know what the term is for them, but you can get pretty fun shapes and designs from a lot of different creatures, but all the ones I'm working on today are pretty standard, so no interesting things there. But I am kind of blending more of the three different creatures together in this muzzle, and I like doing this thing where if it's a bird mixed with like either a cat or dog, I will kind of blend both of those into a muzzle with like a beaked end, but generally it doesn't go all the way back into their face like a regular bird's beak would. As well, I kind of did the muzzle pouches of the Jaguar where they have all their little spots that hold their whiskers. I kind of added that in there as well. So that is pretty much the base face of the creature that I'm working on here. So I was about to wrap this creature design up, but toward the end of the piece here, I felt like the body was a little too crammed into this portrait landscape. I liked the idea for the tail, but what I had to kind of design for it to fit on the page wasn't really what I wanted the creature to end up looking like. So I went ahead and worked out some of the shapes and base colors and decided to, at this stage, complete at least a rough sketch to reference for a traditional media painting. So I'm actually going to be transitioning here from this sketch digitally and moving it over to a entirely new piece that I'm going to be completing traditionally with watercolors. So moving on, I went ahead and restarted the whole sketch, went back to the landscape orientation, and referenced a jaguar that had been standing on a couple of logs or rocks near the water. And I just liked the pose a lot better, and as well I felt like I could incorporate some Tegu aspects, like the really wide chest and the claws and paws of that creature as well. I finished up the sketch. I felt like the pose was a little bit more natural. I have the paw kind of tucked up in a kind of like anticipatory way, like you see some fish in the water and he's about to just snatch him. I am moving forward now with the watercolor part of it. I don't typically do watercolors the way a lot of other people do watercolors that you might see. I was self-taught entirely on watercolor, so I don't do a lot of washes because I didn't know you were supposed to. I tend to work from light to dark. However, I just don't quite work the same way that a lot of other people do. I kind of just put the paint where I want it and at the darkness or opacity that I feel like works for that area, but I'm not really good at letting the paint do what it wants. I keep a pretty firm control over the paint and where it goes on the canvas. So at this point, I'm working on the markings for this creature. I still don't have a name yet, so if you have any ideas, let me know. I wanted to incorporate the different markings of especially the jaguar and the tegu. Tegus have really neat markings where they almost have like their skin is dark and then they have white spots over top. So I was kind of trying to do that kind of incorporated on the paws and the back especially, but just to start I was doing a lot of the type of spotting that you'll see a lot on a jaguar's head. But I was also looking at the different reference for the owls, and there are a lot of different markings on just any kind of type of owl. Like you can look at great horned owls, barn owls, snowy owls. You can see all different types, and any of them that have black markings on them, they're generally going to not be super precise. It's based on where the feathers lay on the body. So I was also working on some of the feathering designs on the head and neck as well. The ears kind of ended up looking like caracal ears, but they were based off of the great horned owl. So I'm wrapping up the spots and patterns on this creature. I've incorporated the markings of the tegu along the back and the bottoms of the paws and legs. And on the tail here, I was wanting to add in some of the barring that happens on a lot of the undersides of different types of raptors' tails. So that's why there's so many little markings there on the tail. I was gonna spare you guys the something like 30 minutes of time that it took to fill in all those different little spots with watercolor. I could have done them with ink, but I only have some Microns, so I thought the watercolors would do a better job of filling in those areas there for the markings. So I'm wrapping up this painting by adding in the shadows. I went ahead with a kind of turquoisey blue. As well, my reference happened to have more or less blue shading on the jaguar as it was looking into the water. The reflection in the water was adding to that shadow color. So I felt pretty confident about going ahead and taking my final creature painting and adding in this really saturated blue, because I was going to add that tone into the water below as well, so you'd have a reason for being there. Finishing up the painting, I'm adding in the blue for the water and adding a bit of purple and gray together to create the texture and color for the rocks that this creature is standing on. I am doing a little bit more of a wet on wet technique with the watercolors than I typically do. With this, I was mostly just too impatient to wait for the water to dry, but it worked out well because I was able to get some of the reflection on the rocks in the water as well, so that worked out pretty good. I also went ahead and took an ink pen at the end and outlined the rocks just to give it a little bit more definition. Hope you enjoyed this little portrait of whatever this little creature is called. If you have any ideas for names, please let me know in the comments. Otherwise, you can check out more of my projects on Patreon, and you can do that by going to patreon.com/charreed. All my other artwork is at charreed.com, and I'm on all the social medias. So thanks for watching. Bye.